国体育会系の皆さん、かかってきなさい。熱血ドドンパアクション。俺たちはガンスターヒーローズだ。
I've spent a lot of time lately playing games that I don't recognize and I don't have experience with. Today is not one of those games. This is Gunstar Heroes, and if you've never played it before, then it's an honor and a privilege for me to be the one to introduce you to it. Once upon a time, 1991, in a faraway galaxy called Tokyo, a group of brilliant-minded Konami staff members met at a coffee shop to conceptualize a new side-scrolling shooter. Konami, being the dream-killing tyrant that they are, rejected the concept and told them that it just wouldn't be successful. Because of this, in 1992, the legend himself, Masato Maegawa, would lead a team of like-minded individuals away from the clutches of Konami and toward a brighter future. That year, Treasure was born. The newly founded studio under Maegawa took their idea for an action shooter to the bigwigs at Sega. But at first, even Sega was reluctant to take it. Treasure was new, and even if the people working in it were veterans, it really didn't matter. Without an established portfolio, it wasn't logical for Sega to fund a project that may or may not be successful. They also didn't want to lose this opportunity, though. Treasure needed a portfolio, and Sega needed a team to develop a licensed game for McDonald's. A few months into working on McDonald's Treasureland, the action shooter idea was pitched again. By now, Sega had seen them hard at work, so the pitch was approved. I'm guessing without a hitch. Treasure split their limited resources into two teams, one that would work on Treasureland, and the other that would work on the action shooter. Unlike the Treasureland team, the action shooter team was given the creative freedom to produce their vision entirely on their own. With a team of only 6 people, Gunstar Heroes development was finished in 10 months. What a crazy 10 months those must have been, because this game is amazing. The first thing you see when you reach the title screen is this 3-dimensional logo box rotating into place. It's eye candy. I imagine kids who saw this for the first time in 1993 had no idea it could get this good on a home system. Home consoles were inferior to arcades, and this was the kind of thing that would make players go, no, fuck that. Consoles are way better. Before you can get into the game, you're met with the selection screen. Here you can choose between fixed angle or free angle shooting, pick a starting blaster, and pick a scenario. Let's be real, only loser plebs would pick fixed angle shooting. If you can't tell just by looking at the gameplay, this game is fucking sweet. There's a lot going on here. There's a ton of enemies on screen constantly. There's always something to shoot at. There's tons of visual flashy effects everywhere. The music is popping, everything looks good and sounds good and just is good. You start the game with one of many different blaster types, and picking up an item changes how the blaster works. Having doubles of one blaster type makes that type stronger. Combining blaster types changes things drastically, and there are so many different ways to shoot something in this game that it's honestly impressive. A couple of other awesome things you can do are dive, slide, hang from platforms, and the minecart segments have an extra mechanic that lets you flip the orientation of the cart. If you like boss fights, this game has a lot of boss fights. Some of them are visually impressive but not very challenging. Some of them are more typical bosses but with a lot of challenge and precision. Some of them are balls. Every single one of them is fun to fight and fun to look at. Treasure really came out flexing on everybody with the 3D effects. They ran so heavy with this that their logo splash screen has 3D. The way it was all accomplished is mind-blowing. Unlike most other 16-bit games with 3D, Gunstar Heroes didn't have any special hardware inside of it that would make these things happen. Star Fox pulled off 3D polygon models on the SNES, but only with the help of the Super FX chip built into the cartridge. What you're seeing in Gunstar Heroes is just sprites, rotating and scaling to simulate 3D models. The fact that there isn't a single processed polygon in any of this 3D artwork is astonishing. Maegawa himself said that it just wouldn't have been possible on the Super Nintendo because they needed every bit of extra processing power they could get. And honestly, I believe that. I think the Super Nintendo was a great console and it did a lot of amazing things, and extra hardware let it do even more amazing things. But it likely wouldn't have had the internal processing power to draw, scale, rotate, and change Z-axis with so many moving parts simultaneously. The Genesis had a Motorola 68K CPU, which was a substantially more powerful unit than the SNES Rico. The Rico had an operating megahertz of 3.5. The Motorola 68K had an operating megahertz of 4, with a boost clock up to 16. The difference isn't nominal. That's a fucking huge processing power gap. Even if the SNES Rico wasn't a restricted derivative, the chip that it's made from only has a boost clock of up to 14 megahertz, which is still inferior. Swear, the more Sega games I talk about, the more I find myself asking how Nintendo ever came to be so popular. They've historically always been behind the curve. I digress though, back on topic. Aside from the jaw-dropping visuals, Gunstar Heroes has an incredible soundtrack courtesy of the very mysterious Nori Hansawa. It's a mix of visceral ambiance, intense action, and a great synth that forms this almost orchestral epic. This is undeniably one of the best examples of the Genesis sound chip, and it makes use of a special feature unique to that chip at the time. The Yamaha YM2612 had 3 programmable stereo channels, one left, one right, and one center. The center channel operating frequency was independently programmable from the rest, which allowed for some of the most unique harmonic sounds in video game history. If you ever hear a Sega Genesis soundtrack that sounds like it has a really dissonant reverb, that's because of this feature. The gameplay is amazing. I touched on it a little bit, but I mean, it's just so good. You run forward, shoot stuff, dive into stuff, slide into stuff, throw enemies, throw bombs at your enemies, throw your enemies at your enemies, and it all feels really good. It's very fluid, with most actions just flowing from one end to the other seamlessly. This game had Konami veterans Mitsuru Yaida and Hideyuki Suganami heading development. Both of them had previously worked on Contra 3 Alien Wars, and you can really tell. The shooting is almost identical to Contra, but with a lot more directional freedom, movement, and variety. Yaiman was also the player character programmer for Super Castlevania 4, which explains a lot of the smoothly rotating gunfire sprites. My absolute favorite part of this game is the board game segment. To start an event, you roll a die that determines how many spaces you move forward on the board. The majority of spaces are boss fights, but mixed in with those are the occasional item room and the more puzzle-centric time trials. This whole section has its own dedicated replayability aside from the rest of the game, and it's a lot of fun to not know what's coming next. It's always a rush to have to practically struggle with no health when this heart attack-inducing "let's fight" pops up on screen. But wait, I hear you yell. Surely there must be something wrong with this game. There's always something wrong with every game. No, that's a load of bullshit. If you've ever gone looking for video game perfection, look no further than Gunstar Heroes. There isn't a single thing wrong with this game. On original hardware, you may experience a bit of slowdown during more graphically intensive moments, but it's not something so noticeable that it hurts the experience. This isn't one of those games that kills you with cheap bullshit, or drags itself on for way longer than it needs to be. There's so many different ways to play, and there's always so much fun to be had, even if you don't make it very far. With that said, we do what we always do, Pinky. We give the game a rating. I can't think of anything more fitting than an easily earned 10 out of 10. Gunstar Heroes is one of the best games ever made. I don't need to say that. It's been said thousands of times by hundreds of critics from every corner of society. It stands strong today as one of the most influential games of the 16-bit era, going on to inspire hundreds of other titles. Every single time you load into a game of Cuphead, you have Gunstar Heroes to thank for laying the foundation. I can't imagine what the world of indie games would be like today if this had never been made. Even today, Gunstar is easy to recommend, easy to enjoy, and with a lot of player favorite features, it's not that hard to get behind. It's amazingly polished, it's a unique experience, and I need to say again, this game was made in just 10 months. What a fucking crazy 10 months those must have been. Thank you, and have a nice day.